My name is Jonathan Huff with Dow AgroSciences, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Palmer Amaranth. This is really a growing issue in the Midwest. It's been an issue in the South for several years now, and it's steadily creeping its way through the Midwest. We want to be on the lookout for this weed. One of the things we really need to understand how this weed, why it's so bad. Everybody asks, why is it so bad in the South? There's several things that make this weed one of the worst weeds we've ever seen. One is it is a dioecious species, meaning it has male plants and female plants. So we see a lot of pollen exchange, a lot of genetic diversity there. This helps it develop resistance very, very quickly and creates all kinds of hybrids for us. So it's really hard to pinpoint some of the mechanisms of resistance within these species because it is so genetically diverse. The other issue we really run into with it is we see a large number of seeds that come off each plant. Under optimal conditions, we can see one plant produce upwards of 1 million seeds per plant. So one of the things we really want to talk about when we start talking about it is the way it grows, because that is a key element in how we're going to control this. This stuff, when it starts to germinate, it's going to germinate throughout the summer, and it grows very rapidly. We've seen under optimal conditions it grow up to 2 to 3 inches per day. I've seen in some instances where I've taken it and actually rototilled it to bare ground. Within a week, I've had it back up at 6 inches to spray and ready for a show in 2 weeks where it was over 2 feet tall. Now, this was in the South under huge humid conditions, very hot, but we have seen it grow pretty rapidly here in the Midwest as well. So it's definitely something we want to stay on top of. There are several keys to identifying Palmer Amaranth. One of the things I like to say before I even start talking about how we identify it is, if you have Amaranth, the species, try to treat them all the same. We want to be proactive with this whole thing. So whether it's tall water hemp, whether it's smooth, tumble pigweed, spiny amaranth, or the Palmer Amaranth, we want to treat them, hey, this is maybe a glyphosate resistant, ALS resistant population, because those are really the high populations we tend to see. So if we treat it like that and be proactive up front, then we don't see as many problems down the road. So let's get into a little bit of the morphology and how it's different from some of the other pigweed species. First thing we're going to look for on these plants is they are hairless plants. So if we can get to a plant and we take a look at it and the stems and the petioles just have hairs on them, then we can automatically eliminate that this is not Palmer. However, if they do not have hair, then we say, okay, here we have, it can either be water hemp or it can be Palmer Amaranth. Now here's where it gets a little bit tough to kind of start narrowing it down at this point. There are several things that can show up in Palmer Amaranth once we narrow it down to, hey, this is a hairless pigweed. The first thing we're going to look for is really long petioles, especially on the lower portion of the plant. The petioles will come straight off the stem, and then the leaf production will come off of that. Now, usually on the lower plants, what we tend to see is that leaf, when you can curl it under, and that petiole is still longer than that leaf, meaning the leaf is not even going to touch the stem. Usually that's a telltale sign that we've got a Palmer Amaranth issue. The next thing we're going to look for is, if it is hairless, sometimes we see a white watermark. You'll be able to see it. It'll be in a C or a V shaped on the leaf, and it's pretty prominent when we see that. But like I said, it still has to be hairless because some of the hairy species do have this watermark as well. One of the other really good characteristics when you're looking for this is if it's hairless and you look at the very tip of that leaf, sometimes there will be one single hair that is sticking out of the very tip of that leaf. If it is hairless and it has this one hair, we can generally classify it as Palmer Amaranth. These is one of the characteristics we kind of look for just to see if it's out there. However, and I mentioned a lot of all these are not always present on these plants. That's why it makes it really tough to identify, and we get a lot of questions about, hey, is this Palmer, is this not Palmer? So when I go back to saying, hey, if we treat them all the same and say all the Amaranth species are the same, then we're going to be proactive about it regardless of whether it's Palmer or water hemp. We're going to stay on top of this from the beginning, which is exactly what we need to do. By getting out there early, getting our residuals out, starting to control this, and then when we start to see that emergence, actually going out there and trying to knock these things out, because we definitely don't want these to get up, because once they get any height on them, we really have a tough time controlling Palmer Amaranth with the existing chemistries that are out there. So one of the other things we really think about Palmer Amaranth is it can really adapt under stress. One of the things we've seen with is we can actually see multiple generations of seed within the same season. So we can see that come up, the plant come up, produce seed, drop it, and then it actually germinate again. In summary, Palmer Amaranth is a new weed to the Midwest that's been moving up from the South. The key point in identifying this plant is the hairless portion of the whole plant. One of the other things we really want to focus on is that the threshold for this plant is 0 because the plant can produce 1 million seeds under optimal conditions. We also want to make sure that we're concentrating on residual herbicides and that using new technologies will be a key moving forward with this weed.